Okay, so good evening, everybody, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have all of you here. Thanks for joining us in that quite important session as part of the Mediterranean Pavilion, talking about the changing climate over the Mediterranean Basin. I'm joined here by a lot of amazing speakers that we are going to hear from them very soon. I'm Hisham Al Askari. I'm professor of Earth Observations and Remote Sensing at Chapman University, California, and I currently work as the vice president for the Egyptian Space Agency for special projects and space missions. Today we are going to be joined by His Excellency, and quite privileged and honored to have His Excellency Major General Mohammed al-Sharif, the governor of the city of Alexandria, Egypt. And I'm also joined by Yana from the Geosecretariat, the chair of the Geosecretariat. Great to have you with us, Yana. We are also privileged to have Dr. Anya Waite. She's the CEO and the scientific director for Ocean Frontier Institute, as well as she is the Associate Vice President Research Ocean at Dalhousie University, Canada. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you with us here today, Anya. And last but not least, Dr. Frederick Brutar. He's the head of the Space for Climate Observatory at the Centre National de Études Spéciales, France. Yeah, pardon my French. So it's really an honor and privilege to have everybody here, and we are going to be talking about something which is really important for all of us and for the Mediterranean Basin, which is the changing climate that everybody is witnessing right now. And the presence of His Excellency General Mohammed al-Sharif is by itself is a testament for the amount of change that we are observing, and also the concerns that are being shared by some of the very important historic cities in the Mediterranean Basin. We are going to be hearing from His Excellency General Mohammed al-Sharif, Governor of Alexandria. I'm going to act as his translator for everybody here, and then we are going to be sharing some thoughts with all our great speakers. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كنت أتمنى الحديث باللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن هستعين بالصديق العزيز العالم الدكتور هشام العسكري لترجمة ما أقوله عن البحر الأبيض المتوسط ومدينة الإسكندرية.
His Excellency is sending his regards to everybody in the room right now, and he's sharing that he wished he would speak in English, but he's going to be counting on me to reveal some of the points that he's going to be making, talking about the changing climate of the Mediterranean Basin.
أعمل محافظا لمدينة الإسكندرية، مدينة السحر والجمال، عروس البحر الأبيض المتوسط، البلد والمدينة التي تغنى بها الشعراء والأدباء.
He is introducing himself as the governor of Alexandria, working for one of the most prestigious, one of the most historic cities of the Mediterranean, that has been brought in a lot of poems, a lot of poetry, and has been brought in a lot of literature due to its importance and its greatness as one of the very historic cities of Egypt.
الإسكندرية المدينة المظلومة والتي ستظلم خلال العقود القادمة بسبب التغيرات المناخية.
The city which has been hit and is going to be even more hit by impacts of global climate change that everybody is witnessing as we speak.
الإسكندرية أقدم سكندريات العالم، وهي أقدم من القاهرة ب1000 عام.
It's one of the most ancient and historic cities of all Alexandrias across the world, and it's even older than the city of Cairo by 1,000 years.
وهي مدينة مليئة بالآثار والتراث منذ العصر البطلمي والعصر القبطي والعصر الإسلامي والروماني واليوناني.
Oh my God. And it is one of the cities which is full of historic monuments going across ages, from the Ptolemaic, from the Coptic, the Islamic, and the Greek ancient history.
لذا حماية مدينة الإسكندرية ليست مهمة دولة مصر فقط، ولكنها مهمة للعالم أجمع.
So it is not only the action of Egypt as a country to take care or to protect that kind of historic city. However, it is one of the most important rules for the entire world.
هي المدينة رقم 5 على مستوى العالم معرضة للغرق.
It's number 5 in the list of the most hit cities, which is to be predicted to drown or to climate change.
رغم أن الانبعاثات الكربونية من مدينة الإسكندرية لا تتجاوز 24%. أكرر الرقم 24%.
Although, like, you know, it's one of the most hit cities in the Mediterranean basin, yet, like, you know, its carbon emissions does not exceed 0.24% of the emissions from من الدولة ولا من الدولة؟
لا، من العالم.
from the entire world.
مدينة الإسكندرية عندما تتبعنا ارتفاع منسوب سطح البحر فيها وجدناه يزداد بشكل متدرج وشكل كبير جدا خلال الأعوام الماضية.
We have witnessed and observed the constant rise in the sea level of the city of Alexandria over the past few decades.
بعض الأبحاث العالمية ترى أن خلال عام 2030 سيزداد منسوب البحر في العام الواحد 65 سنتيمتر.
It has been proven in some of the literature, current and recent research, that in the coming, like, you know, 15 years or so, it's going to be increasing by 65 centimeters per year.
لدينا شواطئ تآكلت وأخذها النحر.
So a lot of beaches have been eroded and, like, you know, it has been taken away or to erosion actions.
إذن الإسكندرية مظلومة رغم عدم وجود أي انبعاثات كربونية منها.
So it is actually not fair for the city of Alexandria, that ancient historic city, to be affected to that impact yet with that level of close to zero emissions.
إذن ماذا سنفعل وماذا سيفعل العالم لمدينة الإسكندرية؟
So what we are doing and what the world is going to be doing for the city of Alexandria.
الدولة المصرية اتخذت إجراءات قوية جدا للتكيف مع التغيرات المناخية وحماية شواطئ الإسكندرية.
The country of Egypt, the government has, like, done a lot in order, like, a lot of projects for the sake of protection of the coast and also to protect against erosion and sea level rise.
أقمنا خلال العامين الماضيين فقط عدد 8 مشاريع على شاطئ البحر الأبيض المتوسط للحفاظ عليه.
Over the past
خلال عامين.
Over the past 2 years, over the past 2 years, like, the government has undertook around 8 projects for the coastal protection.
كانت تكلفتها $1,660,000,000.
1.5 billion and 65 million Egyptian pounds, which is, like, I would say it's a lot of millions US dollars.
ولدينا 3 مشروعات خلال العام القادم بتكلفة $1,900,000,000.
And there is another 3 projects over the coming year which is going to cost around 1.9 billion Egyptian pounds.
وهذه التكلفة من خزينة الدولة المصرية.
And this is from the National Reserve.
ولكن نحتاج أكثر وأكثر لحماية شواطئ الإسكندرية.
Yet we need a lot more for the protection of the coastal areas of the city of Alexandria.
هذا بالإضافة إلى بذلنا الكثير من المشروعات أو عملنا كثير من المشروعات لمقاومة التغيرات المناخية.
Besides, like, there are a lot of other projects that we have undertook as a government in order to protect the city against impacts of global climate change.
لدينا عشرات وجمعيات المصالح الحكومية التي تعمل حاليا بالطاقة الشمسية.
A lot of projects, a lot of government institutions are working using solar energy.
العديد والمئات من وسائل النقل العام أصبحت بالكهرباء.
A lot of public transportation are electric based.
في الإسكندرية أنشأنا أول سوق خضروات وسوق بالطاقة الشمسية.
Fresh market has been developed using solar energy or running using solar energy.
وهو أول سوق في العالم يعمل بالطاقة الشمسية.
The first, like, kind of fresh market for vegetables that operates using solar energy.
على مدار العام الماضي تم زراعة 40,000 شجرة خضراء.
40,000 trees have been planted over the past year in the city of Alexandria.
امتنعنا تماما عن استخدام كل وسائل الفحم والوقود الأحفوري.
No coal and no not natural, like most of the projects are trying to run on green energy.
كل هذا رغم ضعف الانبعاثات الكربونية والحرارية من مصر بشكل عام واسكندرية بشكل خاص.
Yet, like the government and the city and the governor has undertook on their initiative to reduce such emission or to reduce or to do all these kind of green projects, yet with very low emission coming from the city specifically as well as from the whole entire nation.
شاركنا مع الدولة المصرية في السندات الخضراء.
Green bonds. The Alexandria city has contributed to the government of Egypt in the green bonds.
مصر بشكل عام تعمل جاهدة لمكافحة التغيرات المناخية.
Egypt is working so hard in order to face the impacts of global climate change to be foreseen.
والتكيف مع الظروف
And
المناخية.
how to adapt with the current situation.
ولكن الإسكندرية معرضة للخطر.
Yet Alexandria is facing some kind of high risks.
ويجب على العالم بالكامل حماية مدينة الإسكندرية من الغرق ومن موجات تسونامي.
So it's not only Alexandria's effort or the Egyptian government effort, yet it needs to be a joint effort, a global effort, in order to protect Alexandria from severe impacts of global climate change as well as expected tsunamis.
لدينا العديد والعشرات من المشروعات الأخرى ضد التغيرات المناخية.
Other projects have been established also to face global climate change issues.
الحديث عنها طويل جدا.
It's going to take a lot of time in order to list all of them, but I think he's not going to do that.
وسأكتفي بهذا القدر حتى لا أضيع الوقت.
And His Excellency said, like, he's going to stop here so that he doesn't waste the time of everybody. And
ولكن أنا كمحافظ اسكندرية مهموم بمدينة الإسكندرية.
As a governor of Alexandria, I'm quite concerned, and I can translate it this way, I don't get much sleep, I'm losing sleep over the concerns of the city of Alexandria.
شكرا ولن أخذ من وقت الزملاء.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And he is saying his gratitude. Thank you so much. شكرا معالي الوزير. شكرا فندم. شكرا فندم. I think His Excellency Governor Muhammad Sharif laid the ground in a very good way, and now it's going to be our role, to share some of the current scientific evidence which is showing what's going on. We can get started with the first set of slides. Exactly. Here we go. Oh, okay. Should I sit down now? Okay, so I'm gonna be skimming through the slides pretty fast so that we don't waste a lot of time addressing the changing climate of the Mediterranean basin and the increase in the sea surface temperature. So it is not working, the pointer. Here we go. So by looking into the analysis of the Mediterranean trends or the sea surface temperature trends, it has been witnessed and measured that since the 1980, the Mediterranean sea surface temperature have increased between 1 to 2 degrees over the past couple of decades. So that increase has been witnessed, have been observed. We are aware of these different kind of cyclonic behavior events that you can observe over the Atlantic Ocean. It is very common knowledge for all of us to observe such tropical-like or tropical events over the Atlantic Ocean, originating very close to the equator and between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. But to see something like this over the Mediterranean basin, it is not common. It is not expected to be observing something of that nature. So basically we are observing what we call tropical-like cyclones. So it is not a tropical event, however it does have all the different kind of characteristics of tropical events, and it's happening over the Mediterranean basin, which is telling us that something is going wrong. And this is an animation, if you can play the video on your end, which shows you the development of that medicane owed to the fact that it's happening over the over the Mediterranean basin. And if we take a look into the global trend of the sea surface temperature, and by removing the seasonality out of it, so this is a deseasonalized trend, you can see the constant increase in the temperature profile of the sea surface over the Mediterranean basin. And my last slide here is showing you some kind of changes on the sea surface temperature anomaly. I think we have some competition here, but we are going to prevail. So if you can take a look here on the beginning of the decade, okay. I think she's going to stop soon, I hope. So this is very important slide that I would like to shed some light on. You can see during the beginning of the 80s, you will see a lot of blue colors, which is showing you the kind of the cold waters, which is below average at the beginning of the decade. Then you can see some of the white gaps, which shows you that anomalous behavior is kind of average. And then since like the past 20 years or so, you can see an increase in the sea surface temperature, and you can see the acceleration in the behavior. So how faster this kind of acceleration is happening over the Mediterranean basin, which is telling us that the near future might be observing more of these convective clouds, causing more and more of the tropical-like events. Very quick projections of the precipitation happening over the Mediterranean basin, 2020 to 2060 and 26 to 2100, using different scenarios. This is the RCP 4.5, which is like the kind of the little bit optimistic, and I'm kind of cautious saying the word optimistic. And this is the other trend, the other projection, or the long-term projection for the climate under the RCP 8.5, which is kind of showing us a bit of a scary scenario over the past, or over the coming like 80 years or so. So I think this is my last slide. I'm going to stop here. I just wanted to share some of the thoughts about the changing climate over the Mediterranean basin. And now I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Yana. It's going to be, Professor Anne. Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Hesham, and what a great event that you've organized, and thank you so much for your august presence today. And hello to everybody who is watching this remotely. I think there should be some slides. Okay, so the changing climate of the Mediterranean, I'd just like to acknowledge a couple of experts, Mike Smith, who is my Deputy Scientific Director in Canada, and Joachim Tintoret, who is the Director of the Balearic Islands Coastal Ocean Observing System. So we know that the Mediterranean is a climate change hotspot, where some of the vulnerabilities are drought and heat are exacerbated. Already we're seeing 0.4 degree increase, as Hesham said, in seawater temperature. We're seeing 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees increase in air temperature. And we have low-lying coastal cultural heritage sites like Alexandria that are threatened by flooding and erosion. So sea level rise, change in precipitation, these are all really, really important for the Mediterranean. And it's very difficult to actually observe them with a high enough resolution that we can actually predict the trends going forward. So I wanted to just share with you some data. So very often when we look at the Mediterranean, or we look at any water body, we put these dots where oceanographers and observers have pieces of equipment that can record temperature, salinity, and important pieces of information. But in fact, many of these observations are not sustained. In other words, they may actually only have a lifetime of 5 to 10 years, and then they will drop off, or even less. And the problem really is that national and international coordination are a very big challenge across all of the countries around the Mediterranean. And if you look at the, what happens is we get all these streams of data, but we don't actually have the systems in place to bring them together for information where we need them. And the problem here is, and I'll go back to this, yeah, hopefully I can get. So what happens here is we have data users and data providers. Okay. There's a great song. We're hearing some musical moments here at COP. Let's listen to that. It's great. That sounds African, actually, doesn't it? I might wait a moment. Okay, I'll just jump back in. What's that? You can hear. Okay, good. Okay. So what the problem is here is that we have many we have. You see, this is the guy about to fall over shouting in the. This is a demonstration. So we have data providers who have all sorts of data on the ocean, and we have data users who need to get access to that data. But very often, they're separated by what seems like a chasm, and they have to sing and scream about it. And so what happens is that organizations like the Global Ocean Observing System and other organizations actually have to bridge this gap between data providers and data users. And so there's a lot of under-resourced organizations and individuals that work to bridge this gap. These are only two of them, the global one and the Canadian one. So some next steps. We really need to have continued expansion of data learning. We talked about that in another session that Heshen organized. And we really need to bring in students to work in these disciplines to make sure that when we're observing the ocean, we can bring the information from the observation where it's needed, like to the city of Alexandria. And we also need to work with the users of the data to co-design the data and observing systems. And ultimately, observation is what's going to help us understand our changing ocean and create sustainable solutions for development. I was just going to make one more comment. I noticed you mentioned sea level rise, and there are some really interesting data on sea level rise. The tide gauges that measure sea level are concentrated in the north, and very often the tide gauges in the south are not connected with those in the north. And so it's difficult to get a unified picture of what's happening around the whole Mediterranean. And that's something that we as scientists and data providers can actually improve significantly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, for your great presentation. We are just spending a few minutes with all the speakers to just set the ground, and then we are going to have some conversation, and we are going to open the floor for discussion as well. And our next speaker now is Yana, please.
I wonder what they're going to bring out now. I hear music and instruments. Hello, so my name is Yana Gevorkyan, and I represent the group on Earth Observations. We are a global partnership for about 114 countries and partners from across the value chain that represent space agencies, data providers, technologists, UN programs, philanthropic organizations, NGOs. And what we do really is what Hesham and Anya nicely set us up for, is we provide coordination on the global scale to harness the power of those Earth observations that really provided input into Hesham's science and the ocean observations that Anya talked about, and to extract insights that can serve as evidence base for decision making. I love this event because cities, especially coastal cities, are a perfect protagonist of the story we're telling in GEO, and that is harnessing and using this Earth observations for creating sustainable development, managing disaster risk, enabling sustainable growth and resilient societies, whether it's at the city level, at the country level, in transboundary environments. And as far as the coastal cities go, we're seeing that there is a lot more interest on the global scale among many countries to adopt principles that integrate and really look at solving these integrated issues from land to sea. because these are not separate sort of autonomous independent systems. And I think this is where we could focus on, for example, the integrated coastal zone management, which is really a policy planning and decision action framework that is being adopted in a lot of coastline areas and coastal cities in particular. And Earth observations really are a critical input into integrated coastal zone management because they allow us to see the interdependencies between those terrestrial systems, the urban systems, the coastal systems, and then what really goes into the ocean. This represents a really exciting frontier for us to get the communities that historically worked on those individual sort of Earth system sciences to really work together to provide the kind of information that will not only bridge that data provider user kind of space, but really enable action that answers those very complex issues. Nature-based solutions is one topic that is gaining very much momentum at national and local scale, and it's for a very good reason, because the natural ecosystems that lie along the coastlines, they represent key, they provide key services to those local communities at local scale, at national scale. I mean, we can talk about wetlands, which is very present in the Mediterranean basin, and we here in Geosecretariat are big wetland fans. Wetlands do provide protection against sea level rise that you talked about, this Medicane phenomenon by buffering and shielding the cities from the devastating effects of flooding. They provide water purification services. They provide livelihoods because that's where the fishing takes place. They are also a source for tourism. And not to mention, they're also very, very rich sources of carbon sink. So Anya talked about sort of the deluge of data and this really rich stream of data that's available, but the information that that data can really power is not available in a consistent way to all of the cities and countries. So we are reviving and building a very strong, robust geo-wetlands initiative in working with the Convention on Ramsar, on wetlands, to ensure that there is appropriate coverage for all of the wetlands monitoring and mapping, and then most importantly, enabling access to that information to countries so they can create their local scale information about their wetlands, see the baseline of their wetlands conditions and health, set targets for their restoration, protection, and management, and really see change over time. We're hoping that this initiative will take off very quickly because this information is needed now. Wetlands provide a really significant sort of habitat, important habitat for biodiversity, and as you know, there is a big aspirational agenda to conserve 30% of land and oceans by 2030. So we really have no time to waste in terms of extracting the key information for our coastal areas and for other communities. And I mentioned that the wetlands provide sort of key service for climate adaptation. And on this, whoops. I do have one slide that follows around. Thank you so much. It's this brand new work that we've launched just here at this event, whereby we provide technical guidance to countries' national adaptation plans in agriculture monitoring, crop monitoring for food security, water resource management, and flood risk management. And we're really now working with institutions to implement the application of these capabilities by countries in their national adaptation plans. So if you are a community or a country that depends on water, and I challenge anyone who doesn't, raise your hands. If you are a community or a country that really, whose economy partly depends on crops, And if you aren't, I challenge you to raise your hands. You should be interested in the National Adaptation Plan's technical guidance, and we do invite you to reach out to us, anyone here from the GeoSec, to talk about how we can work together to implement these operational services within your countries. So thank you very much, Hisham.
Great. Thank you so much, Yana, for your insight about this new initiative for adaptation, which is quite great, and I echo what you just said. We are going to be closing our presentations, last but not least, with Frederick, who is going to also share some thoughts, and then we are going to open the floor for discussion.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. All the presentations were so interesting, so thank you very much. So I will talk a little bit about an international initiative called the Space for Climate Observatory, which is an international alliance based on the best efforts of all the signatories to federate an ecosystem in their own country, in their own areas, to bring and work on the impacts of climate change at a very local level. So of course, the satellite data are at the heart of these initiatives, and actually the SCO has 3 years right now. It has been decided in 2019, and actually this international initiative came out from anywhere because there were so many data, so many algorithms from everywhere, so many stakeholders all around these lands, all around these universities, decision makers, that actually there was a need to clarify at least a little bit and partially which data, which algorithm could be used to deliver trusted solutions, trusted informations, so to help the decision maker to try to adapt their local municipalities, their local areas to the impacts of climate change. So in this international initiative, of course, like the GEO, actually the SCO is a participative organization of GEO. We want to valorize the use of Earth observation data, satellite Earth observation data, and provide concrete solutions, not only research, but operational solutions. And the SCO awards projects that gather scientists, final user, and in between, service provider. That could be private companies for some countries, like in France, like in other European countries and elsewhere. But it can be also a public entity that will provide the service. And actually all our projects are sharing the same technological core. First, as you mentioned in your slide, there are so many data from everywhere, and particularly all these data coming from our satellite. It's a crazy huge amount. So we need to organize the data first. Satellite data, but also all local data, like GIS data, local data. All these projects are working on these data organizations. The second is to define, to run, and sometimes to calibrate the algorithm that will work on all these data. First, we have, maybe you have heard about this data cube concept, which is putting all the data in the same framework, so to help algorithm like machine learning algorithm to detect some relevant indicators within all these data. And all these data, it's not possible for a human being to detect any trends. But with these machine learning algorithms, it seems that sometimes it's possible to have interesting information from this, coming out from this huge amount of data. And of course, what is very important for SCOPE projects is to provide an easy to use interface. Most of our projects in our portfolio have a final user interface that could be reachable with a URL. Sometimes it's a service provided by a company, but for most of them, you can just go on internet and look the different projects. And I take the example for the tropical deforestation, for instance. If you have internet, you can go on tropisco.org website, and you will see a real-time deforestation monitoring using radar data, for instance. And I could go a little bit in one or two projects, but I don't know, Isham, what you intend to do afterwards. Typically on the Mediterranean basin, actually. In our portfolio, we have 57 projects in different areas, water management, extreme weather events. We have agriculture, carbon monitoring, etc., and of course coastal area monitorings. And if I take just an example, we have a project called IA on wetlands, which aims to monitor the wetlands, the Mediterranean wetlands. It's a consortium with a private company and different public companies and research company, and they will work on this data cube to organize all this data to have a full coverage of Mediterranean wetlands and Ramsar areas. So they are not coming from scratch. There are already some initiatives, but within 2 years, we aim to have harmonized indicators that will help to monitor in a comparative way all these different sites. I think there are something like, they aim to monitor something like 650 sites using this mainly the Sentinel-2 data, which are optical data, as well as Landsat data. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Frederick, for your insight. I think all the speakers, were able to outline the problem that we are trying to address here, which is the changing climate of the Mediterranean. We heard from His Excellency about the kind of impacts that are of high concerns for all of them. I would like to start the conversation with everybody on the podium here by pointing a question to Anya, and I would like to ask you, when you hear about this all Mediterranean ecosystems, it's a partnership between decision makers, scientists, citizens. What do you think is the role of each one of us, and how we can come in different kind of partnerships in order to address what we are facing, being scientists, like for instance, what's our role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, really it's government's role to step in and to support observation systems. It's the researchers' role to explain what is needed and to help interpret those data systems for cities and countries. And I think then we have the private sector who can come in and boost some of this activity. But for researchers, we really need to be jumping in and helping interpret what we're seeing so that policymakers can make the right decisions.
Thank you so much, Anya. And if I can bring it to Yana and ask about, being with the Geo Secretariat, you always look for a role for partnerships, bilateral partnerships. So in your opinion, what kind of needed partnerships in order to address issues and threats owed to global climate change?
So we're in fact a multilateral organization, and I think I'm just going to pick up where again Anya sort of gave me the opening. It's really about creating that strategic partnership that connects the data providers with the scientists, with the technologists who can provide access to the capabilities that across countries gives access to these insights and information, and then connect them to the various decision-making circles. We are, what we like to say this year, our theme has been global action for local impact. We develop, strengthen, and cultivate partnerships that at the global level through, let's say, UN organizations. Many of them are custodians for the various SDG goals and targets, but they represent the collective need of the countries. So by working with those UN organizations, we develop the kind of solutions that are tailored to answering specific questions in those targets and indicators. So for example, with the wetlands, we're working with the Ramsar conventions. We're working with UNCCD on land degradation neutrality to develop the set of methodologies and tools that can allow the countries then at their national level to apply those tools and achieve land degradation neutrality or create wetlands inventories and then monitor and manage those ecosystems. So that global action really serves the purpose at national and local scale. And then vice versa, when we are working with partners to implement these activities on the ground, we're learning quite a bit about the local needs and the national needs, which then feed right back into our efforts. So it's really kind of a rubber band that takes the global coordination, applies it to action on the ground through partnerships, because WGEO cannot be in every place at the same time, but then really informs our strategies moving forward. And what we are now really shaping is the sort of focus areas and the sort of partnerships that can truly take what we've developed over the last 17, 20 years and accelerate the uptake of these solutions, because when you have something that's ready, operational, has proven to save lives, property, there's just simply no excuse for why not go faster at scaling those. And that's where the partnerships with the private sector, with the civil society, are becoming more and more critical.
Thank you so much, Yana. If you would allow me, let me translate some of what you just said, because we might have some also other audience who might be interested to hear what you were talking about. So يانا بتتكلم على العلاقات البينية مع الجهات المختلفة. فإحنا العملية مش فقط هي مؤسسات محلية أو هي دولة فقط، ولكن العلاقات البينية بين الأفراد، بين المؤسسات، بين الجامعات، بين اللاعبين المختلفين في المجالات المختلفة، لأن مش كل واحد هيقدر إن هو يتعامل مع كل الأمور، ولكن كل في تخصصه. فإحنا ممكن نلجأ إلى الجامعات، نلجأ إلى أماكن التمويل، نلجأ إلى الحكومات، نلجأ إلى قطاعات مختلفة علشان نقدر نعمل بارتنرشيبس أو نعمل علاقات بينية بينهم، بحيث إن أنا يكون عندي مشروع ضخم إن هو إن أنا أعمله سكيلينج أب، إن أنا أكبره، إن هو يعني لو أنا عندي حلول، طب ليه الحلول ديت لا تطبق على أرض الواقع وبسكيل كبير، أو إن هي تغطي مثلا مناحي مختلفة من الدولة. أنا هوجه سؤال حاليا لمعالي الوزير. I'm gonna pose a question towards His Excellency جان محمد الشريف about حضرتك دلوقتي سمعت الناس بتتكلم على إيه؟ سمعت رأي بعض العلماء إن إحنا بنتكلم مثلا في بيانات أرضية، سمعت عن بيانات من أقمار الصناعية، سمعت عن مؤسسات ومجتمعات، مؤسسات دولية أو مجتمع مدني. حضرتك شايف كدولة إيه هي الاحتياجات كتضافر جهود بين الهيئات المختلفة دي كلها علشان يشتغلوا مع بعض علشان نقدر نوصل بشكل أو بآخر لحماية المدينة المصدومة؟ لو حضرتك تسمح لي بس أترجم في لحظة. I'm asking His Excellency about, he heard about, what we had to present in terms of scientific evidence, be it from satellite observations, be it from modeling, be it from in situ measurements. He heard about the partnerships, the bilateral agreements, all of that. So what's next? How we can help such a city in order to take some kind of drastic actions to adapt and to cope with the changing climate?
في البداية خليني أشكرك على هذا السؤال الهام جدا، اللي هو ان يجب مش جهود دولة واحدة، يجب ان يكون جهود العالم كله متضافرة لحماية البحار والمحيطات خلال السنوات القادمة.
He's thanking us for the question, and he is saying it is not only the action of one country at a time. However, it should be a global act, by all the nations in order to protect the changing waters of the oceans and of the seas.
إمكانات دولة واحدة لا تكفي لحماية هذه المدن التي تطل على البحار والمحيطات، ولابد من أن يكون هناك علاقات واتفاقات وبروتوكولات بين الدول كاملة لمقاومة التغيرات المناخية خلال السنوات القادمة.
It is not an action of one entity, one at a time. However, it should be a collective act by all different kind of nations for, like, for the areas which are going to be hit the most, for different cities which are coastal cities that are highly affected or highly impacted.
في لقاءات كتير معك أنت شخصيا دكتور هشام العسكري، ولك أبحاث رائعة وأبحاث عالمية، وترى أن خلال الفترات القادمة أو خلال السنوات القادمة ممكن أن تتعرض الإسكندرية وبعض مدن التي تطل على البحر الأبيض المتوسط لموجات تسونامي.
His Excellency is like referring to some of our personal encounters and personal meetings, and also some of the research that we shared with him, as well as global research which is showing that there might be an impact on some coastal cities. Among those is Alexandria, which might be facing some kind of tsunami waves in the near future.
ولكن هل الدول التي تطل على البحر الأبيض المتوسط لها أجهزة إنذار لتنذرها عن موجات التسونامي؟
And he is raising a very good important point, which is other nations which are across the Mediterranean basin, do they have early warning systems which can be used in order to provide the city of Alexandria with some kind of initial warning or early warning in case, God forbid, something is to happen?
أعتقد حينما كنا في مؤتمر مارسيليا وفيينا وتحدثنا عن أجهزة الإنذار المبكر على البحار والمحيطات، أشاروا إلى أن كل أجهزة الإنذار ربما على مستوى العالم أقصى مدة ممكن تتوقع خلالها موجات التسونامي 3 ساعات فقط لا غير.
His Excellency was privileged to attend one of the meetings in Marsilia, and I think
فيينا. Yes.
Sorry, it was the conference for the governors of the Mediterranean cities, and they shared that most of the cities, most of those nations along the coast, they don't have warning systems more than 3 hours ahead of an incident that is to happen.
مدن كثير تغرق في موجات التسونامي دون ذنب أو جريرة.
A lot of cities might be facing tsunami impacts without doing anything wrong, they didn't commit any kind of crime to deserve this kind of impact.
فعلى الدول الكبرى الصناعية الكبرى أن تساعد هذه الدول بالعلماء وبالصور الأقمار الصناعية وبأجهزة الإنذار المبكر لتأمينها على الأقل من الموجات القادمة.
So the least that can be mentioned here, that those industrialized nations which are very well developed and very well advanced should at least provide or support cities like the city of Alexandria with the needed science, with the needed tools like satellite imagery, with the needed capabilities like early warning systems, which can at least help to be prepared or to be acquainted with some kind of actions is to happen.
هذا وإلا العالم كله معرض للخطر وليس المدن التي تطل على البحار والمحيطات.
So it's not only the cities which are coastal cities, but a lot of other nations are also facing the same kind of problem.
ساعدوا أنفسكم قبل أن تساعدوا هذه الدول المعرضة للخطر.
So he is sending a message out there that all the nations need to help themselves before even helping others.
شكرا.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. That I think that was a very strong message from the governor of Alexandria, and I really like what His Excellency said, and I'm pointing my question to Frederick here when he mentioned about the need for other nations or the well-advanced nations to contribute their science, their knowledge, their expertise, their early warning systems, and you spoke about science for climate. Space for Climate Observatory, correct? So in your opinion, what's the future of that initiative?
Thank you. Actually, for the SCO, the dynamic is quite high. We have just written last year a new charter that could be signed by any entities, public entities, a university, space agencies, and would be very happy to have the Egyptian Space Agency part of the Space Climate Observatory, as well our colleague from Canada. And So we expect to have more signatories, but the most important is to have more operational projects. In these projects, the aim is also to share the methodology, to share the data, so that all countries, all entities could use these final operational tools. Our philosophy is to try to give to the community an easy-to-use algorithm of Earth observation data. The European constellation, the Sentinel, are freely downloaded from everywhere, and you can have a full coverage of an area every week, for instance. So it's very effective to use these data for actually any kind of applications, and of course through our different projects to go deeply in one thematics, like monitoring the mangrove, monitoring the coastal areas, high tide, low tide, in different wavelengths. So there are lots of informations, and we aim to give to the community these algorithms for end users.
Thank you so much, Frederick. Let me just translate briefly what you had to say. بيتكلم على initiative متعلقة بالعلوم الفضاء، السبيس فور كلايمت، ان احنا استخدام الاقمار الصناعيه في العلاقات البينيه بين الدول، ازاي نقدر نشارك التقنيات، ازاي نقدر نشارك الميشنز، او ان احنا يكون عندنا اهداف استراتيجيه على مستوى الدول، ان احنا نبتدي نمد الاخرين او نمد بعضنا البعض ببيانات متعلقه بالمد والجزر، متعلقه بارتفاع مستويات سطح البحار، متعلقه بالتغيرات على الدول المختلفه. وبالتالي لما يكون في هذه الشراكه نقدر الدول كلها تتعامل مع بعضها البعض. Yana, you heard what Frederick said right now about the Space for Climate initiative as a way to provide some kind of solutions. So if we want to touch on those different kind of global initiatives, how we can make use of those global initiatives in order to have actual solutions for the Mediterranean region.
I'm actually going to cheat a little bit and maybe follow up on the comments by His Excellency, because I think he emphasized early warning as a really critical need. And I think it's worth reiterating what we heard all last week. The huge announcements that came out in support of the implementation of the UN Secretary General's agenda, early warning for all by 2027, not 37, 2027. And just last week, countries have pledged significant contributions and amounts to support the implementation of this agenda. So I would strongly suggest, and there are a lot of partners who are really coming and aligning their missions, including GEO, but especially also it's led by the WMO, but there's also UNDRR and ITU who are supporting different pillars of this early warning for all. When we're aligning our programs to deliver the great effect that all of our investments of data science and research are really capable of providing to the world. So I would encourage countries to be vocal and be loud in the various international organizations where you do have representations, and demand and request that, yes, that you are aware of solutions and you would like to receive them. So we, from the GEO Secretariat, for example, we, around pre-COP sort of season, we go out with a campaign to our principals and we let them know of the kinds of capabilities that we have available. And we ask our principals to request through their national statements access to these kinds of capabilities, because it's one thing for us in the secretariats of these international organizations to kind of coordinate things globally, and it's another thing, it's not an either or, we need both things. We need the countries also to use every one of these organizations to push for that coordination so that we can realize greater benefits from all of these investments that are going into these various programs. So It's as much our responsibility as it is the responsibility of the various delegations that come to events like this UNFCCC Conference of the Parties to call for more coordinated and action-oriented action. Sorry, I should have thought of another word. From these international organizations. We do a good job. Well, we can always do a better job.
Thank you so much, Yana, for your insight. So let me translate this like very briefly. يانا بتتكلم على الاورجنايزيشنز المختلفة ان ازاي ان هم يقدروا يتعاونوا مع بعضهم البعض علشان يقدروا يحققوا التقنيات المستخدمة. يعني مثلا لو مكان زي الجيو سكرتاريات عندهم تولز كتيرة جدا، عندهم سبل وعندهم ادوات، عايزين يوصلوا الادوات ديت للناس المختلفة علشان يقدروا ان هم الدول تستخدمها او يعرفوها على مستوى الدول بشكل كبير علشان تقدر تستخدم وتقدر تقدم حلول على ارض الواقع لكل الدول اللي هي متاثره او متاثر بالتغيرات المناخيه. I think we are about to come to an end to our session, and I think we might have time for one question from the floor, if any. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. I am Amani Hamdi from Egyptian Meteorological Authority. I am a marine researcher. So I want to ask about that Alexandria is a critical city because it's coastal curvature that is rainy more than any city on the Mediterranean, and the wave height is increased to high levels than any city on the Mediterranean or in the North Egypt coastal. So can we determine to how percentage that the extreme events that can Alexandria face in the future?
I think that's a good question, and I'm not sure if anybody. مين عايزة السؤال اللي
أي حد.
It's open for anybody who is willing to.
I'll have a go. So the question is whether or not Alexandria really is typical because it's undergoing sort of unusually high. I think that the whole Mediterranean basin is changing so quickly that it's very difficult to say whether or not, Alexandria probably is typical in some ways because it's undergoing these big temperature increases and the risk of cyclones and things that have never been happening before. And that's happening all over the world. So in that way, Alexandria is part of a global challenge to meet the accelerating energy of climate change.
Thank you, Anya, for your answer. Yeah, it is part of the process. So, if I can add to what Anya said, the climate is changing and we are observing it. It is not that easy to be able to forecast what might be happening on the very near future. We need more coordinated efforts in order to use the current technologies to address such an issue. I think our neighbors here are having a blast. They are enjoying their time to a great extent. But anyways, we are right on time, and I think it was a great privilege and honor to be on this panel with great figures, great esteemed colleagues. And of course, we are so delighted to have His Excellency Major General Mohammed Al-Sharif, the Governor of Alexandria. I would like to thank you all for your participation and your presence. And I know we are keeping Anya from her flight that she needs to catch in the coming hour and a half. So thank you so much for being here, and we enjoyed your company. Thank you so much.